Hey guys, it's the BC Andrews Critiquer. Pretty much everyone loves Mel Brooks, the comedic mastermind behind cult classics like Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, Spaceballs, and even Get Smart. And even at 95, he's still relatively active in film today. Impressive, huh? But today we'll be looking at his directorial debut and its musical remake, The Producers.
It's about what happens when a wimpy but ambitious accountant named Leo Bloom goes to do the books of Max Bialystock, once among the top producers of Broadway but is now a miserable flop-prone failure who has to prostitute himself to old ladies just to make ends meet. In fact, Bloom is one of his few legit fans still left. But then while doing his accounting job for Max, Bloom comes to the astonishing realization that a flop can actually be more profitable than a hit. How? By drastically overselling shares of the profits of the show, which in the case of a flop, the backers won't expect any of their money back, and the IRS won't investigate the finances of. Only risky thing is, if the show's a success, you're screwed because you can't pay back the backers if you sell more than 100% in shares, let alone 25,000% like our duo eventually does. But Max is willing to take his chances to get such a huge payoff, and partly out of admiration that Bloom is one of his last few fans, wants him to be his partner in the scam. Though initially morally reluctant, Bloom eventually succumbs to his own greed and ego as well, and the two find the perfect musical to achieve their goal of closing on opening night. Springtime for Hitler, which I think Bialystock describes best.
It's practically a love letter to Hitler.
They buy the rights from the eccentric neo-Nazi who wrote it, Franz Liebken. They hire the stereotypically gay and horrendous Broadway director Roger Debris and ensure that it's as offensive and Nazi-glorifying as possible. Nothing can possibly go right with this surefire flop. Right? The original 67 version was only a modest hit at best, and its portrayal of Nazis did rub a few people the same way it did in the actual movie. But on the whole, people absolutely loved this film, and it's arguably Mel Brooks' best known film. Not to mention it really played a part with boosting the careers of the two lead actors, Zero Mastrell and Gene Wilder, who'd appear in many more films together. And 34 years later, Brooks decided to give his movie the Broadway treatment and turned it into a musical with songs written by him, which is really impressive given he's not music literate. Apparently he hummed the melodies into a tape recorder and had a musician transcribe them, and it was a huge critical and financial hit, so Hollywood decided to give the Broadway adaptation the Hollywood treatment in 2005, with Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick reprising their roles as Bialystock and Bloom from the original stage production. It didn't do too well at the box office, and the initial reviews were mixed. Some loved it just as much as the original movie and stage musical, while others thought the staging and set designs were too much like a Broadway show, which didn't transition well to film. But the overall reaction to the film has warmed up considerably since then, and many, including myself, still love it just as much as the 67 original. But is it better than the original? Well, today I'm going to be comparing these two movies to find that out. This is Old versus New, The Producers.
Hollywood certainly has a lot of corrupt producers behind the scenes, but Broadway has a handful itself. Hell, one of them is even the anti-hero of our story. But which one is not only more enjoyable, if not necessarily sympathetic, but also better captures the general perception of a greedy, scamming businessman? Well, let's find out with Best Max Bialystock.
The producer of a great big Broadway flop.
While fame and success can certainly corrupt a lot of people, Max Bialystock is a great example of how hardship and failure can be just as toxic. After his producer's career jumped the shark with nothing but bombs and scathing reviews, Max became a money-lusting, slimy scumbag, perfectly willing to take advantage of little old ladies for cash, first by prostituting himself to them, and then by overselling shares of his upcoming musical that he plans to ensure will flop horribly. Sweet guy, isn't he? Anyway, this one was really difficult to decide because Zero Mastrell and Nathan Lane both kick ass in this role. They're both greedy, manipulative, smug, calculating, but also very charismatic and goofy, making their antics a lot of fun.
Step 1, we find the worst play ever written. Step 2, we hire the worst director in town. Step 3, I raise $2 million.
2?
Yes, one for me, one for you.
Plus, they really do care about Bloom as a friend, so they're not completely unsympathetic. But anyway, if I had to find some sort of advantage between the two, I think it would have to be with Zero Mistrell. The main reason being that his Bialystock gives off a creepy old pervert vibe. I mean, just look at this guy.
That helped a great deal.
Well, you know what they say. Smile and the world smiles with you. This is wine, women, and song, and women.
He's the kind of guy who, if he came within 6 feet of your kids, you'd tase him and call 911. Yes, I know he was able to charm all those old ladies, but most of said ladies weren't very bright. Any level-headed lady would run away screaming from this guy. And let's face it, a lot of corrupt producers and directors are creepy, perverted old men, so this really works well for Bialystock's character. As awesome as Lane did with all the other traits of Bialystock, he never felt particularly creepy. I mean, he's Nathan Lane, so if anything, a lot of ladies would probably find him very appealing. And yeah, you could argue that this makes it easier for him to manipulate the old ladies, but most of them were already very gullible in the first place, so it doesn't make much difference. That, and I felt Lane looked a bit too young for the role. The idea was that it was decades of failure that slowly turned Max into the rotten lowlife he is today. Even though he was only a few years older than Lane at the time, Mistrell did look old enough to fit that description. But Lane hardly looks 30 even though he was in his late 40s at the time. I mean, kudos in real life for staying so healthy and good looking, but he doesn't look like he's had the wear and tear of failure for so many years. Especially jarring when Leo mentioned still having a ticket from a Max Bialystock show he saw as a child, even though his actor in the remake Matthew Broderick is only 6 years younger than Lane. So, was Bialystock a producer as a kid? Actually, I don't want to overthink that. And for the record, Wilder was 18 years younger than Mistrell at the time, so it fits quite well in this case. Again, very close call, but Mistrell just felt a bit more naturally like what the general perception of a corrupt producer is, as well as looking more like he hit his stride 50 years ago, and at this point was desperate enough to resort to fraud for cash. Though, it's probably best that the original wasn't a musical, because Mistrell's singing is...
I'd build a big tall house with rooms by the dozen.
But that's beside the point. Lane, you did awesome, but Mistrell just barely takes the gold in this case. Point goes to the old.
Oh, ye of little faith.
But of course, every evil genius needs a lovable, good-natured sidekick who respects their boss and will help them with their evil plan, but wouldn't harm a fly otherwise. And Leo Bloom certainly fits that description, which I'll go into more detail a little later. But which one better pulls that off, Willy Wonka or Simba? Well, let's find out with Best Leo Bloom.
The producer of a great big Broadway flop.
Now this one seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? And for the record, yes, you're right. But it's actually not as one-sided as you probably think. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Dude, are you insane? What chance would Matthew Broderick have against frickin' Gene Wilder? Well, to be fair, this role really is a perfect fit for Matthew Broderick. Look at who Leo Bloom is. He's an accountant who's generally good-hearted and wants to make a name of himself one day, but is also wimpy, insecure, and most of all weak-willed. So he gets talked into defrauding little old ladies pretty easily with the promise of the money it'll bring him. This character practically sounds like he was written for Matthew Broderick, and he utilizes his lovable geek skills to the max in this role, making for arguably his most memorable performance since The Lion King.
Ah! Give me my leggings! Give it to me! Give it to me! Give it to me! Ah!
I need to lie down for a minute now. Erupting inside of me like hot lava, rising higher and higher and... What is that, Max?
It's called an erection.
But at the same time, Broderick does still have a bit of Ferris Bueller left in him to capture Bloom's greedy side as well. And funny enough, I actually thought that Gene Wilder, best known for playing Willy Wonka, would be too charming and dignified to convincingly play the spineless wimp that Bloom is, kind of like with Dick Van Dyke in Bye Bye Birdie.
Well, talk about bad taste.
But Watching his performance here made me remember that Gene Wilder was one of the greatest actors who ever lived, and using his astonishing acting talent, he came off as at least 3 times as dorky as Matthew Broderick is, was, or ever will be.
My blanket! My blue blanket! Give me my blue blanket! No way out. Leo. No way out. Leo. No way. Leo. No way out.
I think I deserve a toy.
A toy?
A toy.
That's a toy?
Hell, Broderick's bloom could probably beat up Wilder's in a split second. If I was never told that this was the same guy who played Willy Wonka, I never would have guessed it in a million years. That's the last time I ever doubt Gene Wilder's acting ability. It also helps that Wilder's characters have a tendency to make snarky, dry comments that are usually absolutely hilarious, and this role is no exception.
Leo, how much percentage of a play can there be altogether?
Max, you can only sell 100% of anything.
And how much of Springtime for Hitler have we sold?
25,000%.
Now, to his credit, Broderick's desire to make more of himself is a little more fleshed out in the remake, so it does seem a bit more believable that he'd go from a sweet-natured dork to a low-life con artist so quickly. But yeah, Gene Wilder does play the role much better at the end of the day. Sorry, Matt, You
lose! Good day, sir!
Gene, don't rub it in. As I was saying, sorry Matt, you fit into this role like a glove and gave one of your best performances ever, but very few actors can compete with Gene Wilder. Hell, not even Johnny Depp could. His acting ability is just too versatile, believable, and memorable. And that gets my vote.
Point goes to the old.
Oh, how I hate you! I said good day!
But definitely not for humility.
Now that we've looked at both our producers, let's look at the unknowing pawns in their scam, not all of whom ended up being especially helpful at the end of the day. Though, given what these guys were trying to do, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But, helpful or not, they are still very damn memorable. So let's see which one is more memorable with Best Supporting Cast.
The producer of a great big Broadway flop.
Both movies have relatively small supporting casts. I mean, there's a lot of one-scene characters who have a few good laughs, but there's only 4 characters who have a legit purpose and more than 5 minutes of screen time. Well, actually there's 5 in the original, but we'll get to that a little later. But quality over quantity, and the performances of both casts are very funny and memorable. But I gotta make a decision, and this is the first point I'm going to give to the remake. Mainly because the side characters are much more fleshed out and given more to do in the story. Let's start with Franz Liebken, the over-the-top, borderline insane neo-Nazi and playwright of Springtime for Hitler. In the original, he's played by Kenneth Mars, aka Inspector Kemp and King Triton, while in the remake he's played by Will Ferrell, aka Ricky Bobby, Ron Burgundy, Jacob Mugatu, Mustagfa, and of course...
Buddy the Elf, what's your favorite color?
He's actually not really given much more to do in the remake other than being the original casting choice for Hitler, but acting-wise, I still prefer Farrell's performance. Don't get me wrong, Kenneth Mars is hilarious too.
The papers are in order. I love my adopted country. Oh, beautiful, feel speechless, guys.
But based on the roles I just listed for the two, you might have noticed that Will Ferrell has kind of a knack for playing goofy over-the-top characters, and this role is no exception, even if his German accent is average at best.
Do you hear a bad word about Winston Churchill?
Now let's talk about the over-the-top gay director of the show, Roger Debris, and his secretary/lover, Carmen Gia. Yes, I know both portrayals of gays are very exaggerated here and wouldn't slide too well today, but since this movie is meant to be a satire, I'll give them a little leeway. The ones in the remake, played by Gary Beach and Roger Bart, are probably the best parts of the entire movie after the leads.
Is he alright?
He's having a stroke.
What? I'm genius!
Wait a minute! This is a very big decision. It might affect the course of my entire life. I shall have to think about it.
No!
I'll do it. I'll do it!
It helps that the remake utilizes their talent a lot more, not just with 2 great musical numbers, but it's also Roger who's cast as Hitler in the show, after Liebken had a little accident, and ends up making the audience think the show is mocking Hitler, turning it into a smash hit instead of an A-bomb. The downside to that, though, is this results in LSD, the character who did this in the original, being dropped. And that's too bad, because he was really damn funny.
1 and 1 is 2. 2 and 2 is 4. I feel so bad because I'm losing the war. Hey, man, you're a German. All Germans. That means we cannot attack Germany.
But I still think it was a good decision at the end of the day, since Roger is the more important side character and this gives him the screen time he needs. And don't get me wrong, the original Roger and Carmen are a lot of fun as well.
He's gonna kill me. Call the police. Call the police. Help, help, mother, rain!
But again, their screen time is relatively limited, and there also doesn't seem to be much of a connection between the two as gay lovers. The remake not only utilizes these two a lot more, but there's indeed valid chemistry with these guys. And finally, there's Ulla, or
Ulla Inga, Hansen, Benson, Jonsson, Tollen, Holland, Svaden, Swanson.
And unlike with Liebkind, Roger, and Carmen, this one's not even close. Ulla in the original was little more than a bland sex symbol. She only had 2 brief scenes with very brief lines, and that's literally it. Talk about misogyny. The one in the remake played by Nicole Kidman is 10 times better. Yeah, they do still overplay her sexiness a little more than a feminist like me would prefer, but they do still give her a lot of charm and wit, even implying that she's a lot smarter than she lets on.
And at 11, Ulla like to have sex. What time should I get here?
11. Nobody knows what I went through to get you.
Ulla knows. You had to stoop every little old lady in New York.
Even better, unlike Max, who only has lustful feelings for her, Leo actually does end up genuinely falling in love with her, and the two have pretty good chemistry with one another. So much so that Leo even has to make a tough decision about who he should be loyal to in the end. I'll go into more detail with this in the best story round. Oh, and she also gets a fairly prominent role in Springtime for Hitler. Again, both supporting casts are hammy and fun, but the remakes is a tad more memorable and more involved with the story, taking the win on this round. Point goes to the new.
You have broken the Siegfried-Ost!
Now let's talk about the one thing that everyone remembers from these movies, Springtime for Hitler, which show was better orchestrated, better choreographed, and most of all, more distasteful. This is Best Springtime for Hitler production.
The producer of a great big Broadway flop.
Now keep in mind, this is only looking at the parts of the show with the actual Springtime for Hitler song, not the parts where the Hitler casting choice ruins Max and Leo's scam by making the audience think the show is a comedic satire of Hitler. Anyway, as Nazi glorifying as both depictions of the song are, they are very hard to get out of your head, and you'll probably be humming them for a while. It helps that Brooks doesn't go too far with the Nazi themes as well. There are no Holocaust, anti-Semitic, or terrorist jokes. Well, not very many in the case of the last one anyway.
Winter for Poland and France.
The main message of the song is, Germany rocks under Hitler's Nazi reign, and wisely doesn't push it much further than that. But I digress. Which version of the performance is better? It's another tough choice, because while Roger Debris may be the worst director and choreographer who ever lived, Mel Brooks and Susan Stroman are another story, and really know how to get some good dancing and singing from their performers. I particularly love this piece of choreographing. Okay, not what it symbolizes, of course, but it clearly took the dancers and choreographers a lot of time and practice to get this dance move just right, and the effort shows. Still, if I had to choose between the two, I think I like the remake Springtime for Hitler just a tiny bit more. The main reason being is that it has a slightly more light-hearted and upbeat feel, which really helps give the show that distasteful pro-Nazi vibe they're going for. Like, compare the colors in both versions. The ones in the original are darker, more muted, and a bit more solemn, while the ones in the remake are brighter, flashier, and more saturated. I also feel the music is a bit livelier and more pleasant. Like, let's listen to one section of the song from the original.
Don't be stupid, be a smarty. Come and join the Nazi party.
Now let's listen to that section from the remake.
Don't be stupid, be a smarty. Come and join the Nazi party.
You see what I mean? And there's also the simple fact that the remake is much higher budget, so this allows for much bigger, grander sets, a wider range of Nazi uniforms. The Nazi costumes in the original were mainly just Nazi officers, but the new version also has Nazi stormtroopers, Nazi youth, and more. And the finale, oh man, that was one of the most spectacular finales to a Broadway song I've ever seen in my life. Not just with the visuals and choreography, but also with the orchestration. Just listen for yourself. And don't get me wrong, the original's finale was impressive too, but not quite as much due to its lower budget. Tough call, but I am going to go with the new version. As extremely distasteful yet memorable as both versions are, the remake's more upbeat and brighter feel just made it a bit more so, as well as having the money to dazzle us with spectacular production values. Point goes to the new.
Don't be stupid, be a smarty.
Once again, it's all tied up, and it all comes down to which story of this horribly backfired tax fraud scam was better. This is Story for the Win.
The producer of a great big Broadway flop.
Let me start off by saying that just the general story of The Producers is awesome in itself. It's funny, creative, fairly unpredictable, and has a simple but valid moral about how you shouldn't let someone talk you into doing what you know is wrong. Even if it seems impossible you'll get caught, because karma can bite you in the ass in the most unexpected ways. But which one executes the story better? The musical or the non-musical? Let's take a look. You might remember how I mentioned at the beginning of the review about how when the remake was initially released, many critics whined that the movie didn't tone down the over-the-top Broadway acting and tone of the original musical. And again, this is just my own opinion, and I'll keep my language PG, but I think that's the most stupid and biased film criticism I've ever heard in my whole life. So what if it's very theatrical and over the top? Lots of acclaimed films based on Broadway musicals had just as hammy acting. Hell, the original was even hammier at times, and that's considered one of Brooks' best films. Bottom line, that was a really freaking unfair criticism, and I'm glad a lot more people are realizing that these days. Ugh. But again, this is judging the story, not the acting. I just had to get that out of the way. But even there, the corny Broadway mood actually gives the story a very magical, funny, and just overall memorable tone. Like, it's pretty freaking hilarious how all the old ladies literally line up to give Max the checks to invest in the show, and none of them realize that Max was dating all of them solely for monetary gain. Or how about the fact that Franz Liebken's pigeons literally dance and salute during the Gugentop, something dance. And let's be honest, a big reason why Mel Brooks got so famous was because he had a goofy, unconventional style for most of his movies that didn't give a rat's ass about being believable if it was funny and left an impression. These sort of gags really helped the story fit with Mel Brooks' traditional style. And ironically, the original film, which actually was directed by Brooks, doesn't seem to have that tone as prominently featured. Now, I'm not saying the original wasn't funny. No, to quote Max again,
"It was shocking, outrageous, insulting, and I loved every minute of it."
But being Mel Brooks' first movie ever, the director hadn't quite found his stylized niche yet, so the movie's a bit more down-to-earth and realistic compared to most of Brooks' other movies. That's not necessarily bad, it's just not as memorable. Like, I probably wouldn't have guessed this was from Mel Brooks if I was never told it. But again, there are some parts that are vastly funnier, like we see a lot more of the audience's reactions to Springtime for Hitler as they grow more and more disturbed by the content of the show, leading to a tracking shot that Simpsons writer David Merkin called the funniest in film history. And of course, who could forget? I was also disappointed we never saw Max and Leo's reactions when they first discover their plan is backfiring in the new film. That was one of my favorite parts of the original. And get this, when the show ends, you'd think they'd just be in a state of shock like the audience originally was. But no, they actually cry over their huge failure at huge failure. How funny is that? Okay, so comedic gags aside, which version tells the general story better overall? Again, I think the new version does. Yeah, some parts drag a bit longer than they should, but others actually give the story some valid depth and substance. Like in the original, Leo gets talked pretty easily into scamming hundreds of senior citizens in the IRS. I know he wants respect, but he jumps on board pretty fast for such a good-natured, lovable guy. Leo in the new version actually turns the offer down at first, and it takes him a whole day at his boring accounting job to start longing for more, and realize the only way to make it big might be the dirty way. I also like the cute romance arc between Ola and Leo, especially how it puts him in a tough dilemma in the third act. Let me enlighten. The police eventually discover the scam and arrest Max, but miss Leo because he was hiding in the closet when they came. Leo debates on whether he should abandon Max and go to Rio with Ula and the loot, or join his friend in jail. At first he chooses the first one, a decision that really hurts Max. The scene is mostly played for laughs, but you really feel his hurtness and sorrow. But we find their chemistry actually was valid after all, and Leo goes back to defend his friend in court and join him in jail, even singing a pretty sweet duet with him about their friendship. The finale in the original, where they try to blow up the theater to ensure the show won't be a success, was funny, but this finale gives the show more heart and really shows the chemistry between these two as best friends. The last thing I want to discuss is the ultimate fate of Max and Leo. In both movies they go to prison for their crimes, but make use of their time by writing a new musical called Prisoners of Love, which is playing in the background right now, even selling shares to the other prisoners and the warden, though hopefully not overselling again. But in the remake they're let out early for improving the behavior of the other prisoners with their love of music, produce Prisoners of Love on Broadway to huge success, and go on to produce several more musicals together, all based on controversial events. I have mixed feelings about this ending. On the one hand, these two got off way too easy for the kind of shit they pulled. I mean, they're enjoyable, but they're still shysters who cheated hundreds of little old ladies out of their savings and tried to do the same to the IRS. I think it would have been better if they got this happy ending after they paid their debt to society. But then again, it's pretty nice to see Leo fulfill his dream to be a producer and finally receive the producer's hat Max had been denying him throughout the movie. Really shows he finally sees him as a true equal. Plus, this ending does allow for another moral. When you're struggling at what you do in life, instead of turning to crime, find a niche you're good at, which apparently is satires of controversial events in our duo's case, and you'll often find rather pleasing results. So, before I wrap up, I just want to reiterate that I really do love both these movies. They're both great works. But the musical remake just has a bit more of Mel Brooks' traditional style that hadn't quite been fleshed out when he made the original, and also has a little more depth and drama. So in my opinion, it's the superior movie.
Hey guys, first off, these are my parents. I'm visiting them for the weekend.
Hi.
Hey.
So yeah, the final winner by just a tiny bit is the new producers, the superior film. But moving on, Murray Reactions and I are going to be doing an old versus new collaboration together.
What will you guys be reviewing?
Dear Critiquer.
Well, why don't we let old Thomas tell you?
Time to float, my friends.
Ooh, see you then. I wish I had a balloon right now. Play us out, Mel.
Get out! It's over.